Hi, let's talk about material for the tutorial that you will need. So first of all, you will need watercolor paper. For watercolor to work well and for your students to feel confident and successful with their watercolor, a good watercolor paper is very essential. So these are Baohong. They're from China and I got them from Amazon. They are super affordable. They are the same price as a student grade Canson paper, but these are 100% cotton and therefore they hold water really well. I really like these paper and their price point is perfect. And the next, you will need a couple brushes. So I lent my size 10 snap brush to someone else, but if you look on Amazon, if you just look at Princeton snap brush, it will come with a 20 round and I believe a 12 round and a 6 round and a 2 round, and I believe also a size 1 round. So that is a very good starter kit for watercolor, and they were not expensive either. And these are pretty good quality brush. And for the background of the whale painting, you need a flat brush. So I also got the Princeton Neptune set. It comes with many other brushes as well. So you can choose whether you want a flat brush or you can just go to Daiso or some Michaels. They might have a cheaper option, but I also like this very much. So these are the I would say maybe the 5 brushes that you need for any watercolor. For paint, these are what the students usually have, you know, the Crayola paint. They are wonderful, but if you want more depth or pigment, then in the future, if you feel like your student really wants to explore watercolor more in depth, you can move beyond that and go to tubes. So Cotman is from Winsor and Newton. They're relatively affordable and their pigments are pretty good. You only really need like a tiny, maybe a quarter of the cap for each painting you use, and you just add a little bit because a little pigment can go a long way, and that's why a better quality paint can last much longer. In between the Crayola and Cotman, then we have a koi watercolor. This is a student grade watercolor and it comes in dry palette. It has many colors and you can create a color chart, so that way you don't really have to mix too much color. I think this was only like $24 to $30, and these tubes typically is $8 each. So koi watercolor has been pretty good. So this is it for material. This is really all you need for your class. Dry rag, some paper towel, clean jar of water, and a dirty jar of water. And I like to have syringe sometimes, so I can just add water to my palette. But this is up to you. Alright, so let's get ready for our painting tutorial. First of all, I want to teach you guys about wet on wet. So wet on wet is you apply water to the watercolor paper, and because watercolor is spread through water, so the pigment will only stay inside the water. So let's try this. Let's do a little blue. When you mix the paint, you want to make sure you get this kind of consistency, and then you will see when you apply the water there, it will just stay inside the. This is the wet on wet part, and this is wet on dry. So you see, you're gonna have clear and sharp lines when you don't do wet on wet. But a way to remedy that is you can apply clean water to what you just did, and you can kind of smooth it out. So the reason why you want to do wet on wet is, for example, you want to do a flower petal, and that flower petal is defined to an area. So we'll do a petal shape, okay? And then now we're gonna apply some color. Do some orange here. Okay. Alright. So when you do that, it will only stay inside the petal. And whatever color you apply to it, it will combine beautifully without any sharp edges. So if I want to add highlight right now while the paper is still wet, I add a little red, move it around. When it dries, it's gonna be a very beautiful mixture of two colors. Okay, so this is called wet on wet. Next, let's do wet on dry. Okay, now that the paint has dried, let me show you what the overlaying effect is. So I'm gonna do some clean water here. I'm gonna do, let's see, how about red? Okay. Right. Now I'm gonna do wet. This is wet on dry. So this is dry. So because watercolor is very transparent, you will get an effect that's overlapping, and you can still see the blue underneath. And we use this technique a lot to give it a glazed look, or when you want to have two petals together, you can do that, and it will create overlapping petals that looks as if you can see through them. So that is the reason why I love watercolor. Okay, so you notice that I have 2 jars of water here. So this jar I keep for dirty water, and this jar I rinse again for clean water. So the clean water I use for mixing colors, or when I want to apply some highlight. For example, I just did that, and if I want to create some highlight, I can use just clean water, and I just take away the color pigment. I will wash it again, and I dab it on my rag, and I can just do that again, and that will create a highlighted area on the area you just painted. So that's how you create depth in your watercolor painting. Alright, and now let's go over dry on dry. So when you want to apply details, you want to make sure your watercolor has completely dried. When you touch it, it's not cold anymore, and usually I like to speed up that process by blow drying it, and you will see that in our tutorial for the humpback whale. So for now, we're gonna do something called dry on dry. So instead of making a puddle like that, a paint puddle like that, I'm just gonna use my wet tip of my brush, and I will apply it directly to the dried paint, and that will give you a very pigmented stroke. So you can, I like to always have test paper to try it out before I put it on my painting, but this is for practice, so we can do this. So if that's not dark enough, you can apply more paint, and then do that. Okay, so let's see, maybe let's do an ice. So see once it's dry, the color doesn't mix anymore. So it's very important that you need to dry the first layer before you apply the second layer, or else the result will be very muddy. Okay? And the one thing about watercolor is if you don't like it, you can use paper towel to dab it away, or you can apply wet brush, but you just need to make sure it's a clean wet brush, and you can kind of like erase it like that, but you have to do it quick. And of course you're going to take some pigment off, but okay. Now you just have to apply the blue on it again. And to make it blend with the area around it, remember you can always use water as your blending tool. So you can blend it before the paint dry. Okay, so these are some techniques that we're going to use in our tutorial for the whale, humpback whale. For this humpback whale tutorial, we will only use 2 colors. So like I said, we're going to use clean water when we mix our paint. So that's why I like a big fat brush, because it can hold a lot of water in the brush, and therefore we can quickly mix the paint. So let's make a puddle here and transfer it on a palette. So we will also have ocean later if you want to paint the background. So you can keep the puddle just for that ocean. Okay, and I like to test out the color that I mix before I actually use them. So I always have a test strip. Okay, and you can always lighten it by applying water to your paint, and then it will become like this. Okay, and then even lighter. So a same color palette can create many different shades. Okay, alright, so that's our ocean color if you choose to paint the background. Now let's create the bluish gray for a humpback whale. So again, let's make a puddle here. We already have a nice puddle. Let's just bring the pigment over here. Another thing about watercolor is, even if these spots dry on the palette, you can reuse them as long as you apply water back to it, and you can rejuvenate them. And that's why watercolor can be very cost efficient. It's very affordable because you can reuse these color. Alright, okay, now I'm gonna mix the black. I'll make another puddle here. And remember, this black is not gonna be very dark because this is really a kid's grade watercolor. Mix it. It may look dark here on the palette, but once you test it on your paper, you'll see it's not very dark at all. And I really like this grade. This is a very beautiful grade. Alright, and for our shades on the whale, we're just going to use black by itself. So we'll make another puddle here. And this will just be for creating depth, creating shadow on our whale.